welcome everyone. I want to thank those of you who are watching at home and all of our panelists for joining us on the Minnesota stop of the Road to Universal Background Checks tour hosted by Giffords. My name is Robin Lloyd. I'm the Managing Director at Giffords, and I have the honor of sharing the virtual stage tonight with my boss, former Congresswoman and Giffords co-founder, Gabby Giffords, Bob Mokos of Minnesota Gun Owners for Gun Safety, and of course, Senator Tina Smith. Tonight, we're going to discuss background checks and how they will make Minnesota communities safer from gun violence. Passing universal background checks is Giffords' top legislative priority, and that's because it's both practical and popular. It's a foundational step in making sure that our communities are safer from gun violence, and 8 in 10 Minnesotans agree. But in order to do that, we need to elect a gun safety majority to the US Senate, and folks in Minnesota have a huge responsibility in making that happen. So although we can't join together in person today, we want to make sure that we hear from all of you to be a part of this conversation as well. If you have questions, please put them in the comments section on Facebook or YouTube. And if you're watching on Twitter, please use the hashtag #GunSafetyCongress. Before we get to the conversation, I want to introduce each of our panelists and talk a little bit about them. And I'm going to start with Senator Tina Smith. So Senator Smith has called Minnesota home for over 30 years. She began her career at General Mills before starting her own business. But it was through her volunteer work that led her into advocacy and politics. Senator Smith has held roles at Planned Parenthood and served as the chief of staff for both the mayor of Minneapolis and then Governor Mark Dayton. Senator Smith served as Minnesota's lieutenant governor from 2014 until the end of 2017 when she was appointed to the US Senate. She won her special election for the Senate in 2018 and is on the ballot this year to be elected for a full 6-year term to the Senate. Since being in the Senate, Senator Smith has championed common sense gun safety legislation and is a co-sponsor of the Background Check Expansion Act. Senator Smith resides in Minneapolis with her husband and has 2 sons. And we are offering our congratulations for the senator because she has just become a grandmother for the first time. So congratulations, Senator Smith. Thank you again for being here. And how are you? How's your family doing?
Well, thank you, Robin. I'm just so tickled to be with all of you and to see you again, Gabby. It's wonderful to be with you again. And Bob and I have gotten to know each other over the years as we've worked together on common sense gun safety. So we're doing well. And I am a proud grandmother. A little baby Ari was born on June 3rd, and she's just a little bundle of pure joy.
That is so exciting, and congratulations again. So I want to bring in some of the other panelists. So Bob, thank you again for being here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this work?
Okay, well, thank you for having me, Robin, and Gabby, nice to see you again. Thank you for hosting this, and Senator Smith. Like your husband, I'm also married to a grandmother. So anyway, I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. And as a child, when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I joined a rifle team. And I learned how to shoot a long gun. It was a 22 long rifle. It was for target shooting. And we were trained by NRA qualified people. And we participated in NRA sponsored events. So basically, I was what the NRA used to be all about. It was a gun safety and sportsman organization. And for several years, I shot and was able to go up various rankings up to sharpshooter status. And there were higher levels at the level, but I ended up moving on to college and the Air Force after that. In 1986, my oldest sister, she was the oldest sibling of 7 of us. She was shot in a random murder in the Hyde Park area of Chicago. And it was with a handgun. And the gentleman, just as she exited her car to enter her church, he came up and put the gun to her temple and pulled the trigger, and she was dead instantly. She was a divorced mother of 4 daughters, and it had a profound impact, not just on me, but the entire family to this day, and which is why I'm here today. At the time, I was in my career field and working. It was actually as a pilot for a major airline. And as it worked out, I started to pay attention to the gun problem. And I realized that the NRA had morphed into something else. they were no longer a gun safety and sportsman organization. They became a lobbying arm for the gun manufacturing industry. And the more I studied it and the more I looked into it, the more frustrated I became with the gun culture which was developing in our country. As time went on, 2001 happened, and of course, we lost a couple of airplanes hitting the Trade Center and whatnot. In my business, you either know somebody that knows somebody or you know them, and that was the case with us also. So what I did was I became a federal flight deck officer where I was qualified to carry a gun in the cockpit, and this is my handgun training. And we were trained by federal air marshals, and the training was outstanding. And before I took that training, I had to have an intensive background check done, and then a very thorough psychological evaluation. I sat with a psychiatrist for an hour, and the value of something like that, in order to put a gun in somebody's hands, you can't measure that. It's very important. Well, after let's go down the years, a few more until 2012, when Sandy Hook happened, and I think everybody knows what happened at Sandy Hook. And it was because of Sandy Hook that I decided that my government wasn't going to do anything. I decided to do something because I had had enough. And so I looked around and I found various organizations. One of them was the Giffords organization. And it took a bit before I finally got involved with talking to other people and finding out that other gun owners out there think like I do. This is not uncommon. Most gun owners want to have common sense gun legislation. They believe in the background checks. They believe in safety training. They believe in storing your weapons. But for some reason, the gun culture in this country has taken it to an extreme, and people who are not qualified or should not have a gun are getting their hands on a gun. And so now we're in the process of working with Minnesota Gun Owners for Safety and developing this network.
Thank you, Bob. That's such a powerful story and experience that you have, and thank you for sharing about your sister as well. I know that you have been instrumental in working with us and talking to other gun owners, both in Minnesota and across the country. And like you said, we know so many of them agree with us about these common sense gun safety proposals that we talk about and advocate for. So that brings me, last but certainly not least, to Gabby, who is also a gun owner and certainly needs no introduction. Former Congresswoman and our organization's co-founder, Gabby Giffords has led the charge to pass universal background checks for many, many years. We have a brief video about Gabby's perseverance in the face of tragedy. Let's take a look.
What is courage? What does it look like? Courage shows truth to power and stands its ground. It's walking out. It's sitting down. It's marching towards something greater. Courage is telling your story even when it's hard to speak. Courage looks like this.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Gabby Giffords from Southern Arizona.
You can either complain about something or you can try to fix it.
I will always extend my hand across the aisle to do what's right for the American people, to build consensus, and to get the job done.
Earlier today, a number of people were shot in Tucson, Arizona.
Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, wounded in an assassination attempt just about 2 weeks ago, is about to take the next big step along what's expected to be a long road to recovery.
It takes courage to keep going, especially when it feels impossible.
To witness the return of our colleague, who is the personification of courage, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
It's standing up and finding your voice again. Courage is speaking out. Courage is saying, we can do better. And knowing no problem is too big to fix.
And I would love to pass the mic to you to share a few words.
I've known the darkest of days of pain and uncertain recovery. But confronted by despair, I've summoned hope. Confronted by paralysis and aphasia, I responded with grit and determination. I put one foot in front of the other. I found one word and then I found another. My recovery is a daily fight, but fighting makes me stronger. Words once came easily. Today I struggle to speak, but I have not lost my voice. America needs all of us to speak out, even when you have to fight to find the words. I'm in a second fight, the fight to stop gun violence. It's also a fight forged by tragedy and pain, a fight where hard work pays off, a fight that can change lives. We are at a crossroads. We can let the shooting continue, or we can act. We can protect our families, our future. We can vote. We can be on the right side of history. Please join us in this fight. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabby. That is so encouraging to hear, and we need all of those words of encouragement right now. And what a wonderful and powerful way to kick off this conversation tonight. So I think we should just dive right in. And Senator, I'm going to start with you. All eyes have been on Minnesota and specifically the Twin Cities since the death of George Floyd and the peaceful protests that are still happening, a few months later. First, thank you for your leadership in this moment. It has been painful, but also remarkable to witness the collective reckoning that so many Americans are facing regarding police violence and structural racism that exists in this country. Based on the conversations that you've had with folks in your community, and given the scope of gun violence that happens in Minneapolis and in other places in your state, including police violence, what do you think needs to be done?
Well, thank you, Robin, and thank you, Gabby, again. I believe that we are at a real moment of reckoning in our country, certainly in my state. We've seen, after the heartless murder of George Floyd in my hometown, only really a few miles from where I live in Minneapolis, I think that people in this country were compelled to see the impact of the systems of racism in our criminal justice system and in our policing system that have such a terrible and literally deadly impact on people, especially Black and Brown and Indigenous people. And what we saw in this moment were people rising up in demonstrating their belief and their expectation that this country can be better, that we can be the beloved community that we all want. We saw that starting in Minneapolis and then spreading around the world in a movement in a mass movement for justice and equality that I think is almost unprecedented. And this to me feels like it is so connected to the movement that Gabby and Giffords is leading and is energizing around gun safety. Because we're seeing in Minneapolis, just as we're seeing in cities across the country, an upsurge in violence, an upsurge in gun violence in the weeks after the death of George Floyd. And of course, this isn't just about George Floyd. This is about all of the people that have died in such a sad way. And I believe that there is a moment that is happening in my state and around the country where people are, as Gabby said, finding their voice and realizing that this is the moment to use their voice and to speak out and to speak with the power that we all have. And I find that inspiring. And even in this sad time and challenging time in our country, I find it actually really gives me a sense of optimism about what we're going to be able to accomplish. So I'm quite interested in having this conversation and talking about how we can take this moment and really turn it into a true movement for change. Because all of us to sit in our living rooms, or I'm here in my apartment in Washington today, and to talk about this is certainly good. But the question is then, what's the next step that we take? And that's what I'm excited to talk about with all of you today. What are the steps that we can all take to end this scourge of gun violence that's like an epidemic sweeping over our country?
Absolutely. Thank you for those remarks, Senator. And it's the core of what we do at Giffords and what Gabby has done, right? To take tragedy and turn it into action. And we know that there is more that we can do and should do on all of these issues, particularly for Black and Brown people in this country that are disproportionately impacted by gun violence. But as you note, Senator, the fact of the matter is the gun violence crisis in this country leaves no family or community unscathed, right? It is so prevalent and so widespread that we have to take some basic steps like passing universal background checks, like electing a gun safety senate to do that. And we can do those things, and we can do them in short order too. Bob, I'd like to turn to you. You spoke a little bit about your experience with guns, which covers many years and many different types of experiences. Based on your work, when talking to folks in your community, specifically gun owners, how do you do that? How do you approach people? How do you find that you have common ground? And what do you hear from them when you realize that you do have a lot of the same viewpoints about some basic tenets of gun safety and passing very basic principles like universal background checks?
Well, I know that in the past, when I have worked at an event where we were tabling information for one of our organizations, and some people would come up and they say, I'm a gun owner and I don't agree with what you're doing. And I would say, oh, really? What kind of gun do you have? So we just start talking about guns and share our recent experiences. And I tell them that, I'm a gun owner too. But everybody agrees. I mean, this is when you've talked to them. I know we're in a very polarized situation right now, and that doesn't help matters. But most of the people out there really believe in universal background checks for everybody. I mean, 90% after Sandy Hook, 90% of the country wanted that law passed, and it didn't get done because of the polarization in Congress, which has filtered throughout our whole country right now. So I try to bring it down to a level as a one-on-one and talk to them. And I try to keep it calm because you want to get somebody to join us. Here at Minnesota Gun Owners for Safety, one of the things we're trying to do now is through the Minneapolis Council of Churches, I believe, one of our people are setting this up. We're trying to put together an interfaith, respectful conversation. And we're going to invite people who are on the opposite side and people who are on our side, so that it'll be moderated where we have a respectful conversation. We need to open the door and understand that we can have the Second Amendment and we can have common sense gun legislation at the same time.
Absolutely, Bob. And I'm glad to hear that you find that there is so much widespread support for this issue. That's what we found as well. And the polling that we recently released said that 8 in 10 Minnesotans support universal background checks. It's incredibly high numbers. And it's the vast majority of folks that do believe that we should have universal background checks. It's also worth noting that in Minnesota itself, you guys don't have that law. This past February, the Minnesota State House passed a bill. Governor Walz has repeatedly said he wants to sign that bill into law and he wants it on his desk as soon as possible. And yet the Minnesota State Senate has failed to take any action on it. So when folks are thinking about ways that they can engage, one of the most important things to do is to use your power and your voice at the ballot box. And so that means re-electing Senator Tina Smith, but it also means re-electing candidates or electing candidates who are going to care about the issue of gun safety and prioritize it when they're in office. And that starts at the top of the ticket all the way down to the bottom of the ticket for all levels of government, because that's the only way that we're really going to enact meaningful change, when we have everybody focused on this critical problem. So, Gabby, you have done a tremendous amount of advocacy over many, many years. And as we saw in the video that we just watched, January 8th of this past year marked the 9th anniversary since the shooting in Tucson. What have you learned from your experience over the years?
To be grateful for friends and family, and to live every day to the fullest.
That is very true, particularly in this very challenging time that we're all in. It's never more important than ever to remember that. I know that we have some questions from the audience, so I would like to get to that shortly. But before, and to remind folks that if you do have a question, please put it in the comments box. Before we get to that, we do have another video that we'd like to share about why we're in this fight and why we're taking action, and encouraging all of you to take action as well. In this video, you'll also see Congressman John Lewis, who, as I'm sure you all know, passed away recently. Congressman Lewis inspired Gabby and so many of us at Giffords. He was incredibly dedicated to addressing gun violence and addressing violence in all forms throughout his entire life. So let's take a look at the video.
For the first time since the Clinton administration, the House of Representatives passes significant gun legislation.
This bill would basically require background checks for almost every gun sale or gun transfer in America.
Enough is enough. And our first order of business in the Senate should be to pass the House Background Checks Act.
As long as I'm the majority leader of the Senate, none of that stuff is going anywhere. I am indeed the Grim Reaper.
Over 90% of Americans support expanding background checks.
By closing these loopholes, we will make our communities safer.
We have a mission. We have an obligation. It is the right thing to do to save lives.
The Senate is a firewall for the NRA.
And change must come to Washington.
There are now more activists on the side of gun safety than on the side of the NRA.
Now is the time to come together. Be courageous. The nation's counting on you.
Of this movement, a movement that is going to need all of you participating in order for us to be successful. So with that, I'd love to bring more people into the conversation to participate. And I see that we have a question for you, Bob. You've been working in this space for the past number of years. You've done quite a bit. We've mentioned that you've testified at the state capitol. You've appeared in a political ad. We were at a rally outside of the Supreme Court together at the end of last year. So the first question comes from Victor, and he is asking, why have you spoken up more and more on the issue of gun safety, and how do you suggest that others get more involved?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I speak out now because I've got 7 grandchildren, and I got kids who are the same age. Some of those grandchildren are the same age as the Sandy Hook kids. 100 people a day approximately die at the hand of a gun in this country, with hundreds more injured. And to even frame it in another perspective, I looked today on gunviolence.org. There were 332 mass shootings so far this year. That's where 4 or more people are shot at one shooting, not including the shooter. 332, that's more than 1 a day in this country. This problem is well out of control, and we need people to speak out. And so I decided to get involved. Now, how did I get involved? Well, I got on the internet and I found Moms Demand Action Every Town for Gun Safety, the Brady Group, the Giffords Group, the Protect Minnesota here in Minnesota. And I started asking to get in, and I started participating in meetings. And I took every step I could to better inform myself in order to speak out on the subject. I also decided to start participating in the local Democratic caucus. And by coincidence, just a couple of years ago, Senator Smith and I spoke, and I was able to support her as a delegate at the convention a couple of years ago. But that's how you get involved. And now we need people like Senator Smith and Gabby Giffords. And that's who we need now, because until we change the culture, not just in our society, but in Congress, we're not going to make much effort. It's a slow effort until we change all that. So I hope I answered that question.
You did great. And I'll just say on behalf of Giffords, we so appreciate all of the work that you do on a daily basis, and particularly with Minnesota Gun Owners for Safety. You bring such authenticity and passion for the issue, and that just comes through in such a very clear way. And we're so grateful for everything that you've done to engage on this issue.
May I add one more thing? May I add one more thing, please? As a veteran, Do you know that there were more children killed since Sandy Hook than armed forces servicemen in war zones throughout the world since 9/11? 11 more years they had, and we still have more kids killed since Sandy Hook, and that's due to a gun. And I think that's a terrible reflection. And as a veteran, we need to work on this.
Absolutely. The numbers in this country are not going in the right direction. That's a fact. But there is hope. We know what we can do. We can take action. And the very first way that we can do that is electing a gun safety majority to the U.S. Senate and passing universal background checks into law. So it's absolutely critical that we do that. Senator Smith, the next question is for you. It comes from Mary Beth. She says, I have friends and family members who don't watch the news that often and are generally disconnected from politics. When politicians talk about different bills or policy ideas, it's often not obvious as to why these policies matter. How can I explain to people in my life that background checks are important and will benefit their lives?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mary. And I understand that sometimes what's happening in Washington is just hard to relate to. And, I always say that I don't think most people wake up in the morning and say, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. They wake up trying to figure out how to make their lives work. And sometimes when you're paying attention to what's going on in Washington, you've got all these bills with all these long names, and it's hard to relate to. So this is sort of how I think about it. People understand their own lives and their own communities, and they understand the basic fairness of the idea that universal background checks, we should not have loopholes that allow some people to get out of having background checks and other people getting background checks, that it is just common sense. That's why it's called common sense gun safety. And if you ask moms or dads or grandparents or kids whether you think that it makes sense that for somebody to be able to own a lethal weapon, that we should just do a background check to make sure that they are unlikely to do harm to themselves or to others, that just makes common sense. And so when you take away all of the legislative language and all of the bill language and all of that, that's really what it comes down to. And then the next thing you have to ask yourself is, do I think that this is a big enough deal that I want to ask my elected leaders, my state senators and my governor and my United States senators what they think about this, and let them know what you think about this? That's really the essence of how our democracy is supposed to work. It's my job to represent your voice in Washington, D.C., and that's what I work so hard to do every single day. So I think my message to all of you is, don't let sort of the politics and the back and forth get in the way of you expressing your opinion about what you think about this. Your opinion based on what you know about your own life and what you know about what you think is going to keep your kids safe. And the last thing I want to say about this, I think Bob mentioned this, and it is such a good point. I come from the state of Minnesota, where owning a gun and hunting is a part of who we are. It is part of what we love about living in our state. And I know the gun owners that I know care deeply about gun safety and making sure that they are going to be safe, that their children are going to be safe. They teach their children how to use a gun safely in order to protect them. And so this is not about whether you are pro-gun or anti-gun. This is about whether you think that we need common sense laws to protect people and to keep guns out of the hands of those that will do harm. And that's what I think we have to keep in mind as we look at this issue.
Thank you, Senator. That's such a great point, right? We're talking about something that is so fundamental and so basic. And if we don't close this background check loophole, if we do not enact universal background checks, then people are still going to be able to get guns that legally cannot have them. So we have to do this first, and then there are many other things that we have to do to address gun violence. But I think breaking it down and having that very clear message that this is not a partisan issue, this is a safety issue, this is wanting to keep our children safe, is so critical. So Gabby, this last question is for you, since you always leave us with such an uplifting message, and it comes from Oscar. He asks, with all of the difficulties that our country is dealing with right now, how do you continue to keep a very positive outlook and have such optimism?
I want to make the world a better place.
Well said, absolutely. Thank you for that, Gabby. So I think before we wrap up, I'd love to hear from our panelists for one, final closing statement, so to speak. Bob, can I turn it over to you to kick us off?
Oh, sure. I mentioned I was from Chicago, and when people hear that I do this, and I have people say, "Well, you're from Chicago. They got really strict gun laws, and look what's going on over there." And I said, "Well, this is why we have to have universal background checks through all states and good gun codes, because most of the 60% of the guns that are used in Chicago are coming from out of state. So we need this whole country to get on one page on this stuff." Let's remember, as a veteran, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that includes all of the amendments and the Bill of Rights and all that. And I have no problem with that. But we're not free because we have the Second Amendment. We have the Second Amendment because we're free. And that gives us the ability and the right to fine tune this thing so that we can make it so that everybody can live in a safe society. And that's what I said earlier about we can have the Second Amendment and have our gun laws at the same time. Here at Minnesota Gun Owners for Safety, if you're interested in joining us, I encourage you to please look us up. We are all about reducing gun violence in Minnesota. We want to shift the gun culture and promote responsible gun ownership. I call it the trifecta. If you want a gun, take a background check, learn how to shoot the gun, and learn how to safely store the gun. And so if you can go to giffords.org/MN gun owners, giffords.org/MN gun owners, we'd welcome you and we can put you to work. Awesome. And thank you for Gabby and Senator Smith for championing our causes.
Thank you, Bob. That's so excellent, and we're so grateful for your partnership. You've done such incredible things, and we look forward to working with you on many of the initiatives that you talked about, and also to, in re-electing Senator Smith back to the U.S. Senate. Senator, would you like to say a few final words?
Well, sure. First, I just want to say it's so great to see my friends again on this call. And Bob, I remember so well the first time that we met one another, and I heard you tell your story about your sister, and I thought about what to share something that is so personal and so painful in so many in big groups of people like this is really a gift that you are giving to all of us. And of course, Gabby, the same is so true for you. Sharing your experience is a way of helping people to understand something so important, which is that every single one of us can make a difference in this place of common sense gun safety and universal background checks to keep illegal guns that are being held illegally by people out of their hands. And I keep thinking about how this is such a broadly agreed upon policy and value amongst Americans and amongst Minnesotans, and yet our elected officials are not following through on what the people want. They are putting the powerful interests of the national gun lobby ahead of what people want. And so all of you are the accountability it's for you to help to bring accountability by making sure that you are asking about who your state representatives and your state senators, what they think about common sense gun safety. You know where I stand on this, but if you care about this, let your voice and your vote speak for you on this issue. And certainly as we think about the important other national elections, I want to serve in a United States Senate where we don't have a leader who calls himself the Grim Reaper, who promises that the gun safety laws that most Americans want are going to be stopped at the door. I don't want an obstructionist like that. I want somebody who is going to help us to bring to life the values of Americans on gun safety. So you have a great amount of power in that. I want to thank everybody who's participating in using your voice and using your power. Your voices are strong, but only if you use them. So please use them in this election.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Smith. That is such a great point. We are at a tipping point in this country right now, and the stakes could not be higher. The gun lobby, Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump, and their allies, they are convinced that Minnesota is a battleground state for them. But we know that when 8 in 10 Minnesotans support universal background checks, it's obvious that they are not doing the bidding of the people, right? They are ignoring what the people want. And so we need to make sure that we are electing leaders like Senator Smith and others to carry out the wishes of the people on this critically important issue. And the best way that we can do that, as Senator Smith just said, is at the ballot box and making sure that our voices are heard and flipping the Senate into Democrat control so that we can see progress on this issue after far, far too many years of obstruction, quite frankly. So for all of you that are participating, we need you to be voting, volunteering, talking to your friends and family about this issue and about the need for all of us to be voting this fall. For more information, please visit Senator Smith's website, which is tinaforminnesota.com/act. There's ways for you to get involved there. And in addition to voting on November 3rd, you can also vote early in person in Minnesota starting on September 18th, or request a ballot to vote by mail. So as folks are thinking about what their voting plan is going to be for this fall, it's not too early to start thinking about it now and taking appropriate action to make sure that you're set up for your vote to be counted this fall. So for the next few months, we are going to do everything that we can to lift up our champions like Senator Smith and build upon the progress that they've already made, ensure that there is a new gun safety majority in Congress that is going to pass universal background checks. And hopefully we'll have President Biden sign it into law, which will be incredibly exciting. So thank you all for this wonderful conversation. I found it to be very inspiring and very informative. And we'll be back on the road soon. So talk to you then. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.